My name is Martha. I'm 70 years old. In this quiet corner of the world, I've lived my entire life. The house I live in now isn't the one I grew up in, but it might as well be. The walls still echo with the sound of my daughter's laughter, with the footsteps of my grandson running through the hallway. It's the same neighborhood, with the same faces, the same faded storefronts that have been here long before the digital age took over, replacing simple things with instant gratification. Some days I look out the window and see the same children playing on the same old swings, the same park where my daughter once ran. Time moves slowly here, and I've grown with it, settled into the rhythm of the place. But something shifted. Something changed in the last few years. I used to be the heart of this family, the anchor that everyone turned to. I raised my daughter alone after her father walked out on us. I gave up everything I had to make sure she never knew the ache of abandonment. My life was dedicated to her, and later to my grandson, who came into the world when I was in my 60s. I was so proud, so grateful to have a second chance to love and care for someone. When he was born, I was there every step of the way. I helped with his midnight feedings when my daughter had to work. I helped teach him to walk, to talk, to read. I was the one who picked him up from school, who made him hot chocolate when he came in from the cold. And through it all, he always called me Mom, Mom. It was his little name for me. I loved it. I loved him. I loved the life I had built around my family. Even as I got older, I was still the one they could count on. But then something changed. I wasn't sure when it started, but one day I realized that I didn't fit in anymore. My daughter, who used to rely on me for everything, began to pull away. At first, it was subtle. A few less calls, a few less visits. Then, as the years went on, it became more obvious. She began to make decisions without consulting me. Her tone when she spoke to me became sharper. I could feel the distance growing between us. And then there was my grandson. The boy I'd raised, the one who used to cling to me like a lifeline, began to slip away as well. I started hearing less of the mom that once filled my days, and more of the vague, distant grandma that seemed to mark the start of his own transformation. I was no longer his first choice. His friends, his schoolwork, his sports, they all took precedence. I was the background now, just a figure in the periphery. And today? Today was supposed to be his day. It was graduation day. The schoolyard was filled with balloons and flowers. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and excitement. It was supposed to be a celebration, a milestone in his life. Everyone was in their best clothes, their finest suits. It felt like the whole town had shown up to watch these kids, my grandson included, walk across the stage to mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I should have been happy for him, proud even, and I was. But there was a gnawing emptiness that I couldn't shake. I felt out of place. As I walked into the event, I was met with warm smiles and polite nods, but no real recognition. No one seemed to know who I was, at least not in the way I wanted them to. My daughter greeted me with a distracted smile. "Mom, they're seating us over here," she said, waving her hand towards a small table in the corner. "There weren't enough places at the main tables, but you'll be fine here." She didn't even look at me properly. Just a quick glance, then she turned away to talk to some friends. I nodded, trying to swallow the sting of her words. They didn't seem to understand, didn't seem to realize what I had done for this family. How many nights I stayed up late, how many sacrifices I made, how much of myself I had given to make sure they had everything they needed. But none of that seemed to matter now. I sat at the small table, alone. My grandson, who used to cling to me like a lifeline, was off with his friends, laughing and taking pictures. He didn't even glance in my direction, not once. I could see him, though, his face lit up with joy, with excitement. This was his day. his moment, and here I was, at the back of the room, with a paper plate and a plastic cup. I don't know why it bothered me so much. Maybe it was the fact that I had spent so many years being the one to hold everything together, only to be shoved to the side when it really mattered. Maybe it was the realization that I was no longer important to them, not in the way I thought I was. I looked around the room, trying to find some comfort in the faces around me, but I couldn't. The other parents and relatives were all gathered together, chatting and laughing. They had their own families, their own circles. I was alone, just a spectator. I watched as my daughter stood by the stage, chatting with the other parents. She was so happy, so caught up in the moment. I tried to catch her eye, but she never looked over. And my grandson? He was too busy with his phone, too caught up in his world to even acknowledge that I was there. And that was when it hit me. They didn't need me anymore. I wasn't part of their world. I was just a forgotten relic of a past they had moved on from. I had been a part of their foundation, but now I was just the old wallpaper blending into the background. I put my fork down. I didn't need to eat. I stood up without saying a word. No one noticed. No one cared. The music played, the voices around me blurred into a hum. I simply walked past the colorful balloons, the tables piled high with food, and out of the schoolyard. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. As I walked, I could feel something snapping inside me. Something that had been held together by years of loyalty, of love, of sacrifice, was breaking. I wasn't going to be their background anymore, and they would never know it. I stepped outside into the fresh air, the sounds of the celebration fading behind me. It was strange, really. The sun was still shining, the birds were still singing in the trees, but the weight of what had just happened felt like a heavy fog pressing in on me. I didn't know where I was going, and it didn't matter. I just needed to leave. I walked down the street past the familiar old houses that had always felt like home, but now they looked strange to me, almost like they belonged to someone else. I felt the pavement beneath my feet, but didn't register the distance I was covering. The noise of the world seemed so far away, and yet all I could hear was the hollow thud of my own heartbeat. I didn't know why I felt so empty. I had lived my life giving everything to my family. I raised my daughter, I cared for my grandson, and I did it all without asking for anything in return. But somewhere along the way, I had lost my place. They had outgrown me, and now I was invisible, forgotten. I didn't want to go home, not to the house that had once been full of laughter and chaos, with my daughter and grandson's voices echoing through every room, not to the quiet emptiness that now awaited me. So I kept walking. It wasn't until I found myself standing outside a small cafe that I realized I had been walking for hours. The cafe was a cozy little place with a faded sign and a smell of fresh coffee wafting through the door. I didn't need to go inside, but something about it called to me. Maybe it was the warmth of the place, or maybe it was the quiet comfort of being somewhere that wasn't a part of my past, a place where no one knew me or cared to. I pushed the door open, the little bell above it jingling softly. The cafe was empty, save for a young woman behind the counter, her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She was focused on something behind the counter, but when she saw me, she smiled, a genuine warm smile that made me pause for a moment. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice light and friendly. "What can I get for you?" I hesitated, not sure what I wanted. I wasn't hungry, but the thought of sitting down, of having someone offer me kindness, was tempting. "I'll have a coffee," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Black, please." The girl nodded and moved to prepare my coffee. As she worked, I noticed her, really noticed her, for the first time. She was young, maybe 20, and there was a weariness in her eyes that didn't belong to someone so young. She seemed to be carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, but she was smiling despite it all. It struck me, in that moment, how much I had forgotten what it meant to smile without pretending, to live without constantly putting others first. When she handed me my coffee, I smiled back. She didn't ask me what was wrong or why I looked so out of place. She didn't make me feel like I had to explain myself. She just gave me the coffee and let me sit down at one of the small tables by the window. I took a sip of the coffee, and for the first time in hours, I felt something warm inside me. Something more than just the bitterness of the drink. It was comfort, a connection. She came over to check on me after a few minutes, her eyes soft, her smile never wavering. "How's the coffee?" she asked, genuinely interested. "It's good," I replied. "Better than I expected." She chuckled. "I always say coffee tastes better when you're not rushing." There was something about her. She wasn't just a waitress. She was different. I could see that she was working hard. Her clothes were simple, and she looked tired, but there was a quiet strength in her. She wasn't waiting for life to give her anything. She was taking it on her own terms. "Are you from around here?" I asked after a moment of silence. "Born and raised," she replied. "I'm studying to be a nurse, work here to make ends meet. I live in the basement of a building down the street." "Must be tough," I said softly, unable to stop myself. It was the first time in a long while I had spoken to someone who didn't know me, didn't see me as just a grandmother or some woman who had lost her place. She shrugged. "It's life, right? We all have our struggles." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice, almost as though sharing a secret. "But it's worth it. I'm going to make something of myself." Her words struck me harder than I expected. There was so much determination in her voice, so much hope. I remembered the days when I had that same fire, when I believed that I could do anything, when I felt like the world was mine to shape. But that was before I gave everything to my family, before I became invisible. "Do you ever feel like you're alone?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. Then she nodded. "Sometimes, but I keep going. Because I have to. It's not about anyone else, really. It's about what you want for yourself." I took in her words, letting them settle deep inside. She didn't know me. She didn't know my story. But somehow, she had given me the clarity I had been missing for so long. I had been so busy pouring myself into others, trying to hold on to my family, trying to be what they needed me to be, that I had forgotten about what I needed, what I wanted. I smiled at her, truly smiled for the first time in days. "You're right," I said, my voice firmer than it had been in years. "It's about what you want for yourself." She smiled back, a smile that reached her eyes. "Exactly." As I sat there, sipping my coffee, I realized something. I had spent so many years thinking that my worth came from being needed by others, from being the center of my family's world. But what if I could be something else? What if I didn't have to be the background anymore? I could feel it, the stirrings of something deep inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. It was a quiet voice, but it was there, clear and undeniable. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to be the one holding everything together anymore. Maybe it was time for me to let go of the role I had been playing for so long and find my own path. As I finished my coffee, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I wasn't invisible here. I wasn't just the grandmother sitting in the corner at a graduation or the woman who had been left behind. I was Martha, and that was enough. I left the cafe with a renewed sense of purpose. There was no going back now. Something had changed inside me. Something had been unlocked, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. The next morning, I woke up early. The house was too quiet, empty in a way it hadn't been when my grandson was younger, when his laughter used to echo down the hall. But now, with him off to college and my daughter wrapped up in her own world, I was left in a silence that seemed louder than any noise. I made my coffee in the kitchen, mechanically going through the motions of my usual routine. The steam curled up from the mug in front of me, but it didn't bring the same comfort it used to. I was aware of every sound in the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant rattle of the pipes, but none of it seemed to matter anymore. The world outside had shifted, and I had to find a new place in it. I picked up the phone, scrolling absent-mindedly through the news. And that's when I saw it. An advertisement for a local cafe that I had passed by the day before, the one where I met the waitress, Emma. Looking for a fresh start? Join us at the Willow Cafe, a place to share a cup of coffee and a conversation. New faces are always welcome. I paused. There was something about that message, something about the simple invitation that pulled me in. Maybe it was because Emma had seemed so real, so full of life in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I wondered how her day was going. Before I could think too much about it, I made a decision. I grabbed my jacket, pulled on my shoes, and left the house. It didn't matter if I had a destination or a plan. Sometimes you just need to step out the door and see where the world takes you. The cafe was quieter than the day before, but Emma was there, wiping down a table near the window. When she saw me, her face lit up with that same warm, welcoming smile. "Back for another cup of coffee?" she asked, walking toward me. "I think I might just need one," I said with a small laugh. "I'm Martha, by the way. I didn't properly introduce myself yesterday." She smiled again. "I remember. I'm Emma. Nice to see you again, Martha. What can I get for you today?" I ordered my usual, a black coffee, but there was something different this time. I wasn't just here for the coffee. I was here because, in Emma, I saw something I had lost. "I was thinking," I said slowly, as she moved to prepare the coffee. "I've spent so much of my life taking care of others. I never really focused on what I wanted, on what I could do for myself. I guess, I guess I've forgotten how to be someone for myself." Emma paused and turned to face me, her eyes thoughtful. "That's a tough one, but you're not the only one. I think a lot of us feel like we've lost ourselves somewhere along the way." I was quiet for a moment, taking in her words. She was right. It wasn't just me. So many people got caught up in what they were supposed to be for others that they lost track of who they were. And I'd spent so many years in the background, being the one who gave and gave without asking for anything in return, that I'd forgotten what it meant to be Martha, not just a grandmother or mother. "Do you ever think about what you want to leave behind?" I asked, the question coming out of nowhere, even to me. She looked up at me, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" I said, choosing my words carefully, "do you ever think about the mark you want to leave on the world? Not the one people expect, but the one that's yours, the one that comes from you." She was silent for a moment, wiping down a glass in her hands. "I guess I don't think about it much. I just focus on making it through the day. But, yeah, I guess I'd want to be remembered for caring, for making a difference, even if it's just to one person." Her words hit me harder than I expected. They weren't just empty ideals or dreams of grandeur. They were grounded in a real, tangible desire to connect. She wanted to leave something meaningful behind, no matter how small, and that was exactly what I had forgotten to do for myself. Make something meaningful, not just for others, but for me. As I sat there, nursing my coffee, I began to realize that maybe it was time to make a change, to leave something behind. Not just the family photos and recipes that cluttered my attic, but something more profound, something that would live on beyond the day-to-day, beyond the expectations of my family. I wasn't sure yet what it would be, but I knew one thing: it would be my own. I left the cafe later that morning, feeling different. The air felt lighter, and for the first time in a long while, I had a sense of direction. I wasn't sure what the next step was, but I knew I had to make it. For me. The days passed in a blur of small decisions. I took a long look at the family photos, the letters and keepsakes that had accumulated over the years. I hadn't touched them in ages, but now, as I sorted through them, I realized something. I had lived my life for my family, but it was time to live for myself. I packed up the box with care, making sure to include the books I had cherished, the recipes I had passed down through the years, the letters from friends long gone, and as I wrote on the package, a quiet but resolute decision washed over me. For Emma, I wrote, so that you know you can be a woman and not be silent. I didn't cry as I packed the box. I wasn't sad. I was simply organizing, putting things in their proper place, including my own heart. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. I had given so much of myself, and now it was time to give something different, something that belonged only to me. I wasn't sure how Emma would receive it, but I hoped she'd understand. I hoped she'd see that it was never too late to change, to reclaim a part of yourself that you'd lost. As I set the box aside, I felt a quiet sense of peace. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I was ready to step into it, and maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. The day after I packed up that box, something shifted. It wasn't a huge, dramatic change, but there was a quiet realization that had settled in me, like a new layer of skin. I was, for the first time in many years, truly thinking about my life, not just as it related to others, but as it related to me. I had spent most of my adult life either in the shadow of my own family or trying to fill a role that was never truly mine. First, I was the strong, unshakable mother for my daughter, and then, later, I became the constant figure in my grandson's life, always available, always caring, always giving. But when the table had turned, when I no longer fit neatly into the family's vision, I had become a forgotten accessory. In my own way, I'd been grieving that loss for some time, but now, in the wake of Emma's kindness, I felt that I didn't need anyone else to validate me. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror that afternoon, looking at the woman I had become. 69 years of experience were etched into the lines of my face, but there was no regret there, no resentment. I had loved fiercely, cared deeply, and had given all I could. It had been enough, but it wasn't enough anymore. Now I had to decide what to do with the years left ahead of me. I decided to make a change, something concrete, something that would last. The idea came to me slowly, like a wave building strength before it hits the shore. I wanted to create something that had my name on it, something that would carry my legacy but not be bound to the past, something that had nothing to do with being a grandmother or a mother, but only about being Martha. I'd always had a deep love for education, for giving others a chance to better themselves. It had been one of the things I had done quietly, behind the scenes, helping students with extra tutoring, donating books, encouraging young people to keep going. But what if I could do more? What if I could create something permanent, something meaningful? I spent the next few days thinking about it, researching scholarships. I wanted to set up a fund, a small one at first. It wouldn't be enough to change the world, but it could change someone's life. A scholarship for young women who had no family support, who had no one to help them navigate the world. I didn't want this to be about wealth or prestige. I didn't want it to be about having the right last name. I wanted it to be about something simple and true, the chance to rise, to succeed, without the burden of needing anyone's approval. I wanted Emma to have that chance, to be someone who didn't have to explain herself to anyone. I took a deep breath, sat down at the old desk in my study, and began writing up the terms for the scholarship. I could feel my heart racing as I typed, as though I was finally breathing life into something that had been dormant inside me for far too long. When I finished, I sat back in my chair and read it over one more time. The name of the scholarship would be mine. It would honor my legacy, but in a way that felt true to who I was now. It wouldn't be tied to my past, my family, or their expectations of me. It would simply be a gift for someone who truly needed it, someone like Emma. I've done my part, I whispered aloud to the empty room. Now it's time for them to do theirs. I wrote the final part of the document carefully. The scholarship is to be awarded to a young woman who demonstrates resilience and a commitment to her future. The recipient must be without family support, as this scholarship aims to provide a hand up for those who have none. This is a chance to rise above, to stand tall, to be seen. I signed it with a steady hand, my name filling the page in bold letters. Martha. It felt like I was reclaiming something, something that had always been mine, but had been buried under years of quiet sacrifice. Later that afternoon, I handed the scholarship proposal to the local registrar. It wasn't a grand gesture, it wasn't a flashy announcement, but I knew in my heart it was the right decision. As I walked back home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of the past hadn't vanished, but it didn't define me anymore. I knew I had done something that would endure beyond the fleeting moments of graduation parties or family events, something that would carry my name and my values into the future. A week passed, and life continued on its usual rhythm. I continued my visits to the cafe, where Emma and I shared cups of coffee and quiet conversations. Each day, I felt more connected to her, as though she had become a part of something I was building, something I had never fully realized I needed until now. It was on one of those visits that I received the letter. It wasn't much, just a simple postcard, handwritten with care. Dear Martha, it read, thank you for seeing me. You're the first one who has ever really seen a person in me. I will carry your kindness with me always. I sat there for a moment, the postcard in my hand, the weight of it settling in my chest. Emma had written back. She had acknowledged my gift, my gesture, and she had shared her gratitude with me. It wasn't just about the scholarship. It was about the understanding between two people who had once felt invisible. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled softly and placed the postcard on my bookshelf. I looked over at the old certificates and awards my grandson had received, all neatly arranged on the shelf. But they weren't the ones that mattered anymore. Now, I had something else to remember. The world doesn't always give you what you expect. It doesn't always honor the sacrifices you make or the love you give. But sometimes, in the quietest of moments, you find a way to honor yourself, and in doing so, you change the course of everything. I had done that, and it felt like a homecoming. It had been almost a year since I set up the scholarship. The paperwork had been filed, the rules laid out, and my name had finally become something I could be proud of. The first recipient had already been chosen, a bright young woman named Elena, whose family had cast her aside when she refused to follow their path of conformity. She had shown extraordinary promise despite the odds against her, and I felt a deep sense of pride as I thought of her carrying on what I had started. But there was something more I needed to do, something I hadn't quite realized until just recently. The truth was, I couldn't fully leave the past behind me until I made one final decision, one final act that would give me the closure I needed. I had been putting it off for months. The paperwork sat in a folder on my desk, gathering dust. It wasn't something I had forgotten about. No, it was too important. It was just that, for the longest time, I had resisted it. Something about it felt final, too final, and yet I knew in my heart It was the last step to truly letting go. I stood in front of my desk, the documents laid out before me. The scholarship, while meaningful, wasn't enough. I needed something more personal, more complete. I had never intended to make my grandson a part of it. Not because I didn't love him. No, my love for him was immeasurable. But because, over time, he had made it clear he didn't value what I had done. His life had taken a different direction, one that left little room for me in it. But this final act was not about him. It was about me. It was about reclaiming what had been taken piece by piece over the years. It was about asserting my independence, my worth, in a way that had nothing to do with the people I had once held dear. I pulled out a form from the folder. It was the one I had filled out months ago, asking to designate a portion of the scholarship funds for a particular cause, one I had been considering for a while. But the choice wasn't about the cause. It was about what I had written in the margins. I had written a note to myself. Only a girl without family support can receive this scholarship. It's time to stop giving without receiving. And then, below that, was my grandson's name, his request for financial help to start his own business. His father had been pushing him to apply for it, touting how important it would be for his future. But I hadn't even considered it when filling out the paperwork. I paused, staring at the form. I knew this moment would come. I had been avoiding it, but I couldn't anymore. Without a second thought, I picked up my pen and drew a line through his name, the ink bold and deliberate. It wasn't about punishing him. It was about making a statement to myself. I had loved him, yes, but I had given him everything, and he had turned away when I needed him most. The money, the sacrifices, the support, it all meant nothing to him now. He had forgotten, or maybe never truly understood, that it wasn't about the things I did for him. It was about the love, the dedication, the years I spent caring for him, giving him the best of myself. I made my decision. I would not allow myself to be the silent background anymore, to be the placeholder for everyone else's needs. The people I had loved had failed to see me for who I truly was, for what I had contributed. They took it all for granted. But I wasn't going to let that define me any longer. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of his easy success, built on my back. I folded the papers carefully, placed them in an envelope, and sealed it. The scholarship was now only for those who truly needed it. It was my final act of severing the connection with the past. The following week, as I sat at my favorite cafe, I received an unexpected letter. The envelope was plain, with no return address, just a simple scribbled note inside. Thank you for everything. I will make you proud. Elena. I read the note again, and something deep inside me shifted. Elena, the girl I had chosen, the one who had no family to support her, was now the symbol of everything I had hoped for. It wasn't about the money or the scholarship itself. It was about the opportunity to change her life. As I sat there, the weight of the past began to lift in small increments. I wasn't a mother anymore, not in the traditional sense. I wasn't a grandmother. I was simply Martha, a woman who had lived her life with dignity and was now letting go of the things that had held her back. I didn't need my grandson's approval. I didn't need anyone's approval, and I didn't need to justify the choices I had made. I placed the postcard on the table, a quiet reminder of the choice I had made. It was one of many small acts, but together they would create something lasting, something that would ripple through time long after I was gone. When I returned home that evening, I stood in front of my bookshelf. The certificates my grandson had received over the years had all but faded in my mind. But the postcard, the small note from Elena, had earned its place among them. I smiled to myself as I placed it in the space where my grandson's school awards once were. I didn't need to hold on to that part of the past anymore. Memory is a home, I thought as I gazed at the postcard, tucked safely on the shelf. And sometimes, to preserve it, you need to change the tenants. The home I had once known, the life I had once lived, would always be a part of me. But now it was time for something new to take root, something more fulfilling, something all my own. It had been months since I'd made that decision, and the quiet power of it still lingered in my bones. I had felt lighter somehow, more myself. I had found a new sense of purpose, something I hadn't realized I was missing until the space had opened up. The old house, which had once been full of the laughter of my daughter and grandson, felt emptier now. The rooms seemed quieter, the walls less alive, but that was just the way of things. Houses, like people, change as time moves on. And I had to admit, it was no longer a place for me to linger in the past. On a dreary afternoon, I stood at the foot of the staircase, my hand resting on the banister, gazing up at the framed photos of my daughter and grandson hanging on the walls. I thought about the day I had put those up, how proud I had been. But now, with the scholarship behind me and my decision made, I realized that those photographs were no longer reflections of who I was. They were relics from another time, another version of myself that I had outgrown. I had already begun packing up my life in boxes, sorting through things that once held meaning and others that had simply filled space. But there was still one last thing to do, something that needed to be addressed before I could fully move on. It was time to go to the registration office. I had been toying with the idea for weeks, the last step of my liberation, the last legal formality. I had never changed my name. It had been Martha all my life. Martha, the caretaker, the mother, the grandmother. I had been all of those things for others, but never truly for myself. I had allowed myself to be defined by the roles I played, but now, with the scholarship settled and my ties to the past broken, I felt the urge to shed it all. I made my way to the office on foot, the cold autumn wind biting at my cheeks. There was a slight nervousness in my step, but it wasn't the same kind of anxiety I used to feel. It was more of a curiosity, a sense of wonder at what life would be like once I took this final step. The office was quiet when I entered. The receptionist barely glanced up from her desk as I approached, but I could tell she was familiar with this kind of request. I wasn't the first, and I certainly wouldn't be the last. I took a deep breath as I handed her the paperwork. It felt odd, like a small but significant moment of history unfolding. The forms were simple: my name, my request, my reason. There wasn't much to it, but for me, it was everything. I wanted to be Martha, just Martha. No attachments, no expectations, no labels. I wanted to walk into the next chapter of my life and see a blank page ready to be written on by only me. The woman took the forms, gave them a cursory glance, and nodded. "It'll be processed in a few days. You'll receive your confirmation in the mail." I smiled and nodded, my heart strangely full, even though the task was so simple. This wasn't a goodbye to my past. It was a goodbye to my past as it had been defined by others. It was the first step into truly owning my own narrative. As I left the office, I took one last glance back at the building. I felt like a weight had lifted off me. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was profound in its quiet simplicity. The sun had started to set, casting long shadows across the street. I walked slowly, savoring the moment, feeling free for the first time in years. For the first time, I wasn't someone's mother or grandmother. I was simply Martha, and that felt more like home than anything else ever had. The next day, I received the confirmation letter in the mail. It was official. My name had been changed. There was no fanfare, no celebrations, just a single line on a piece of paper confirming what I had known in my heart all along. I placed the letter on the kitchen table, beside the postcard from Elena. I looked at it for a moment, the words from the young woman ringing in my ears. "You're the first one who saw a person in me." I had always been a person, but it had taken me so long to realize that. And now, for the first time, I saw myself as that person. The phone rang just as I was about to put the letter away. It was my daughter. She never called without a reason, and I could tell this one was important. "Mama," she said, her voice strained, "can we talk?" I hesitated. The distance between us had grown too wide over the years. But still, she was my daughter, and there would always be a part of me that cared deeply for her. "I've been thinking about what you did," she continued, "about the scholarship and everything. I didn't really understand it before." I exhaled slowly, bracing myself for whatever she was about to say. It had taken years for me to get to this point, and I wasn't sure if I could handle any more emotional turmoil. But I knew this conversation was inevitable. I had prepared for it. "I don't know if I can ever make it right," she said quietly. But I wanted to say, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand. I was so wrapped up in my own life." I swallowed hard. "It's all right. It's been a long time, hasn't it?" She paused, and I could hear the strain in her voice. "It has. I I never thought you would do something like this. The scholarship, the name change. I don't know what to say." "I didn't do it for you," I replied calmly. "I did it for me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing softly, the weight of my words settling in. "I know," she whispered, and that was it. There was nothing more to say. The final conversation had been had, and I had said what I needed to say. I hung up the phone, placing it gently on the table. The house was quieter now, but somehow in its silence, I felt more whole than I had in years. I turned my gaze to the postcards and letters on the shelf, the ones that had come from Elena and others. They were reminders of a life that was my own, not defined by the expectations of others. And as I sat there, the weight of the years gradually lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. It was all mine. I was free. Time had passed since that phone call with my daughter, a few months to be exact. The days had slowly shifted from one another, each one carrying me further from the past I had lived for so long. It wasn't as though I'd erased it, not completely, but I'd learned to redefine it. Each day felt like a soft rebirth. There was something beautiful in reclaiming who you were meant to be, rather than who everyone else told you to be. The scholarship had become my anchor. I had given it my name, Martha's Scholarship for Women Without Family Support, and I watched as applications slowly trickled in. The idea of it had bloomed out of a quiet realization that I could give to others what I had lacked in my own life, that feeling of support, of being seen, without the weight of someone else's expectations. As applications arrived, I sifted through them with care. It wasn't about picking someone who merely needed financial assistance. It was about finding someone who, like me, had been overlooked, underestimated, and cast aside. I had learned the hard way that those were the people who deserved the most. Among the stack of applications, one caught my eye. It was from a young woman named Emma. She had written about growing up in foster care, about being constantly moved from one family to another, never really belonging anywhere. Her words felt raw, but they resonated with me deeply. She spoke of a desire to become a nurse, not just to escape her past, but because she truly believed in the power of caring for others. I spent hours reading and rereading her essay. It wasn't perfect. None of them ever were. But there was something in her story that echoed my own. The isolation, the yearning, the feeling of never being truly wanted. And yet, she still believed in the goodness of the world, in the ability to make it better. I knew, without a doubt, that she was the one. I reached out to Emma a few weeks later. her excitement palpable over the phone as I confirmed her selection for the scholarship. She couldn't believe it. "I never thought someone like you would believe in someone like me," she said, her voice trembling. I smiled. "I see more in you than you know," I replied. "This is your chance. Take it." When Emma arrived at the small ceremony to accept her scholarship, I was there, waiting for her. The other recipients had parents and families by their side, posing for pictures, exchanging congratulations. But Emma came alone. She had no one to cheer for her but herself. She walked up to the stage, her eyes wide with disbelief. The spotlight caught her face, making her look even more vulnerable than I had imagined. She didn't smile right away, but when she saw me in the crowd, she nodded, her gaze steady. It was a look of gratitude, but also of strength. After the ceremony, we talked for a while, just the two of us, away from the bustle. Her story came pouring out even more. How she had never truly known what family meant, how she had always been the outsider. But I saw in her something familiar, a need to prove herself, a fire that burned silently beneath her quiet exterior. "I think you're going to do great things," I told her, knowing deep down that I was right. She smiled, the warmth of it almost shy. "I don't know if I can ever repay you for this," she said. I shook my head. "You don't have to. Just live your life and make it count." That evening, after Emma left, I returned home to a quiet that felt familiar, but different now. The boxes were mostly unpacked, the house feeling more like mine than it ever had before. I walked past the shelves lined with old family photos, pausing in front of the one that had once made me feel so connected to the past. The picture of my grandson at his own graduation, smiling brightly. It had been months since I'd walked away from his event. Since that day, I'd heard nothing from him. No apology, no recognition, not even a simple acknowledgement. It was as though the entire day had been erased from memory. I couldn't say I was surprised, but there was still a quiet sadness in it. I had expected nothing, but still something inside me had yearned for just a small piece of recognition, something to show that the time I had given had meant something. But it hadn't, and that, in itself, was freeing. I no longer needed their approval. I had learned that it was possible to build your own path, even if the people you loved weren't willing to walk beside you. I glanced back at the shelf where my grandson's school certificates used to sit, a silent reminder of the past that I had closed the door on. They had been replaced by Emma's postcard, the one she had sent me after receiving the scholarship. She had written, "You're the first one who saw a person in me." I placed it carefully next to the framed photo of me and Emma at the ceremony, and it struck me then that memory, like family, wasn't bound to blood or lineage. It was about the people you chose to hold in your heart, the people who chose to see you for who you really were. My grandson, who had once been the center of my world, was now a distant echo, his absence no longer a pain, but a reminder that some chapters were meant to be closed. But Emma, this stranger who had walked into my life at just the right moment, had filled the space I didn't even know was empty. It wasn't the same as raising my own flesh and blood. It was different, but it was real. As I sat there in the quiet of my home, I realized something. Memory is also a home. And sometimes, to preserve it, you need to change the tenants. I smiled softly. It was the first time in years I had felt at peace. The first time I truly understood that family isn't always about blood. It's about who you choose to share your life with. And now, as I turned off the lights and closed the door behind me, I knew that my story was just beginning.